I remember that time so clearly, even though it feels like it was so long ago.
Gosh, I was just a boy at the time, but those turn of events, they helped me become a man.
The commander was so hard on us all the time, but I knew it. He was just trying to sharpen us into the men he wanted us to be.
I still can't believe that he's gone. I really wish I had been stronger. Maybe there was something I could have done.
Oh, but you may not know the tale of our commander. So let's take a few moments and look back upon the Path of Radiance. Path of Radiance opens up with the protagonist, Ike, getting obliterated by his instructor, who we quickly find out is his father. When Ike wakes up, we watch as this training sequence continues. I do like the way this game disguises the player's tutorial as Ike's training, though it does lead to a lot of early exposition, which kind of slows the pace of the game's intro. Most tutorials in the game come to you as the new mechanics are introduced, however, and they're optional, so that's a plus to veterans of the series. After this tutorial, Ike successfully pleads his case to finally be a full member of the mercenary group, and is finally allowed to go on a mission. So Ike is dispatched with Titania, and we take on a short mission to a nearby town so we can rid it of some bandits. This mission largely also serves as a tutorial, though it isn't entirely scripted. I'm reasonably certain it's possible to lose units, even in this battle here, though I don't think it's possible to fail the fight just because of how strong Titania is. After rendering this town free of bandits, the game quickly picks up in intensity. Titania's delivered a letter from the bandits claiming they've kidnapped Mist and Rolf. She tells Reese to ready the boys for battle, but await her return, and then she zips away. Of course, however, the boys cannot stand waiting for even a moment and rush off immediately towards the bandit stronghold. This game does a good job of making a lot of fights look overwhelming, while also giving you the ability to take on enemies slowly at your own pace. At least in the early game. This battle also gives us a fair bit of insight into the relationship of the characters and their personalities. I like the way Path of Radiance does this. It doesn't exposition dump all of the character on you, but it does slowly reveal it as we go along. Upon saving the kids with a last-minute ambush from our sniper, Shinon, we leave for camp. It's pretty clear from the exchanges between Ike and his father that, although they are related, Ike does not get any special treatment as a fellow mercenary. After a quick reprimand, our team is quickly shipped out again to a nearby port town to handle some unruly pirates. This fight is our first step in recruiting new companions for our team, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was gaining the good graces of one of my true late-game powerhouses. With Shinon and Gatri in front, this fight ends pretty quickly. So quickly, in fact, that we discover that Shinon and Gatri are a little bored with the success coming so easily and not netting them more than it does. After this battle, we're reunited with an old ally that we, the player, are meeting for the first time. Soren tells us a tale of a terrible war that has started in our land of Crimea. Dayan, a neighboring kingdom, has invaded with all of its might and has fiercely attacked our kingdom. After some more discussion, Commander Grill decides we should attempt to gain more info before taking any decisive action about the oncoming war. In a bit of a twist, he commands Ike to lead this team with Titania serving as an advisor. The battle our little scout party endures is the first real battle of the game, in my opinion. Aside from an hour with the Sacred Stones a very long time ago, this was my first time playing through a Fire Emblem game, and I wasn't ready. That being said, I made some crucial mistakes in my combat strategy during this fight. You see this? You see this moment right here? Do you see the problem? I sure didn't, but I quickly realized my mistake when I wasn't able to defeat the oncoming enemies quickly enough to protect my backline magic users. I took my first losses here, and they felt pretty devastating at the time. I lost both my caster and the only healer I'd have for quite a while. There were definitely a few different ways I could have saved them, and I definitely felt like I'd lose this blind Ironman run at this point. Once I lost my mages, however, the fight became a lot easier with not having to defend my more frail units. We pushed out and crushed all the enemies pretty easily from this point. Something this game does that's pretty interesting is moving forward without characters that have died in battle. Some will stay in the party for their story points, though they won't be able to participate in battles. However, other characters truly die and are just removed from the game entirely. The way this game handles characters that have died is honestly pretty well done, and I wasn't expecting that at first, so it caught me off guard, but in a good way. After the battle, Ike laments the death of Reese while reassuring Soren that he still has value as an advisor, even though he can't fight. They both sort of died in this fight, yet are treated differently based on the narrative. This is the game's way of keeping Soren relevant for story missions, while leaving a lasting impact that our fighting forces have become smaller due to my failure. Once that's out of the way, the story continues on largely as it otherwise would have. We find a mysterious woman in the trees that has fainted. I remember the moment I saw her artwork and I thought to myself, there's way too much detail in her design for her to be a commoner. Soren coldly remarks that we shouldn't get involved and should leave her, though Ike and Titania don't share the sentiment. To me, this is where the slow early game actually starts to pick up. Things start to happen pretty quickly at this point, with Alencia, the girl we found, telling us that she's actually secretly a member of the royal family. While the mercs are debating if they should believe her story and escort her to Gallia as she requests, they're surrounded by Daean troops who demand that Alencia be released to them. As if to confirm Alencia's identity, the Daean troops don't even wait for a response before attacking us. In this battle, we're forced to defend our position against a large onslaught of enemy attackers. I felt like this battle was the moment I truly started to understand the troops I had and their strengths. I didn't know the troops or game well enough to develop a great strategy, but I started to become less afraid to use characters as they were intended. This game definitely hands you some overpowered characters to help you float along on the early game, and I finally realized this. While I definitely could have played this way better, in the end we defended our position successfully and forced the enemy to retreat. Upon our victory, we immediately decide it's best to pack up and leave now that we've made a direct enemy of Daean. We learn a bit more about both Alencia and Mist as they chat to themselves while packing. This is our first introduction to a mysterious medallion that Mist keeps as a memento of her mother. This medallion is obviously important, you can tell by the cutscene that's dedicated solely to it. We don't really find out a lot about this medallion now, but that's sure to come later. We're also treated to a brief glimpse into the enemy's conversation as we learn a new threat is being set upon us. General Petrine is given her appearance in the scene, and we're made to know right away that she is terrifying. She's rude to her subordinate, who clearly fears her, and scoffs at the idea of needing additional information in order to destroy us. As we approach Gallia, we're once again given information on the kingdom of subhumans that we're approaching, as Shinon gives his gripping tale of these monstrous furry beasts with massive claws and fangs. I couldn't help but sort of fill in some of the plot for myself. It was at this point I decided that we were going to find these monsters and them not quite be as Shinon had described. Though I did find it interesting that this game wasn't afraid to go into the darker and heavier themes like this. Now, nearing the edge of the forest, we ready ourselves for combat and refer to Soren's strategic wisdom on how we should proceed out of the shelter of the trees. He proposes we split our troops with a smaller unit to engage the enemy and tie them up while the bulk of the company slip by. I remember lamenting at the start of this fight as I had to do it with only 4 combat units. I'm certain I would have had 50% more units if I hadn't failed previously to protect both Reese and Soren. That said, we proceeded carefully through the trees to the west bridge as Soren suggested. I really thought this battle would be quite tough with so few units and no healer. However, as I mentioned earlier, this game really equips you for the early game if you choose to rely on certain units more. I found that abusing this when needed while trying also to funnel XP into my weaker units worked out pretty great. We finished this fight handily, although I was a tiny bit nervous at moments due to the lack of a healer. I also figured out that I could abuse enemy healers to gain a large amount of XP if I wanted to do that. After skating through that battle, we meet up with the princess and the kids. However, we determined that we cannot quite move forward yet without the rest of our troops, so we decide to double back and search for the commander and the others. Giga Chadtania notices some movement in a fort nearby, so we move in to investigate. This wasn't quite a trap, but it sure does feel like one when we're discovered and quickly surrounded by Daean forces. While backed into a corner here, we have no choice but to fight. Pretty quickly into the start of the fight, we're graced with an additional ally. Mia had been rescued by Grill and stumbled upon us while making her escape. She's not wildly strong, but I was very happy to have a larger party. This fight was also relatively an easy fight, although I was still a bit nervous at times. Just when General Petrine appears to join in combat, bringing a lot of stress along with her, Commander Grill shows up with Gatri and Shinon to even the odds. The Holy Grill shows up just in time to sweet-talk Petrine into a one-on-one, off-screen of course, and they disappear, leaving us to deal with the rest. With Team Tank and Spank split off from the rest of the party, I just leave them to deal with the units on the northwest side of the battlefield while clearing the other units with my original party. We quickly rush to find Grill about to win his fight against Petrine when we're surrounded by enemy troops. This event looks pretty grim for us until the army hears the nearby roar of something fierce. The Daean troops call out that it's Gallian beast soldiers and are clearly terrified by that thought. Several events unfold in a matter of moments at this point. We meet the Gallian forces and also the mysterious Black Knight, and learn that he is not the leader of the Daean forces, but clearly carries a lot of influence. He demands that Petrine retreat immediately, and she reluctantly does so. We also notice that Commander Grill and the Black Knight have a staring contest of some sorts before the Black Knight also departs. Along with the turn of events we just witnessed, we later talk with Ranulf and learn that the Crimean royal family has been completely decimated, except for Princess Alincia. Ranulf offers for us to stay in a nearby castle while Alincia goes to speak with the King of Gallia. While at this castle, we're treated to a long but very impactful story development. Grill, who clearly had something on his mind earlier, goes for a late-night walk, with Ike following him. They agree to walk and talk together, though only briefly before Grill orders Ike to head back to the castle immediately. Ike does head back towards the castle and almost makes it there before sensing something is wrong and rushing back towards his father. A cutscene ensues, showing Commander Grill facing off against the Black Knight in battle. In an unusual twist, the Black Knight tosses Grill a sword and demands that he use it. This is clearly a special sword of some kind, but Grill refuses to use it and tosses it back. The combatants clash once more, and the fight ends, with Grill being run through and falling. It was pretty easy to foresee this coming, but that didn't make it any easier to understand why this happened. What was the Black Knight doing here at this time, and what was the connection he had to Commander Grill? We're offered very little in the way of answers, only that at some point Ike's father taught the Black Knight to fight, and the Black Knight is after something he believes that Grill still has. Ike's life is threatened as a bargaining chip to have Grill reveal the location of this secret item, but as if on cue, the King of Gallia approaches and scares away the Black Knight. This chapter ends with Ike carrying his dying father back to the castle while begging him to hang on. The start of the next chapter brings about a lot of changes for our little mercenary group. Ike is promoted to commander, and everyone follows his orders and loves him immediately. Well, no, not really. We quickly find out that Shinon and Gotri have left the group. I remember being very shocked by this. I knew Shinon especially didn't really care for Ike much, but I didn't really expect this. Boyd and Oscar deliver this news to us as Titania fills us in on our situation with Gallia. It's nice to hear Ike lament for a moment that he's inexperienced and anyone following his leadership may be in danger. I like this because it shows that he's self-aware, and I like seeing his growth when he reflects upon himself. Also, he's not downing himself, I don't think. He's just being realistic, which is important. From this point on, we really get to manage the company as our own. That includes being able to finally shop for items, allocate bonus XP, and develop support relationships. There's a fair bit to unpack here, but I want to talk about the support relationships for a moment. I didn't really know how this worked and thus didn't make great use of it early on, but it is really powerful and shouldn't be ignored. As units work together on the battlefield, you may have an opportunity to have them chat and build a support relationship. This allows them to boost each other's stats if they stand near enough to each other while on the battlefield. You can see this in the character's stat screen, and it can stack with multiple units, making it really powerful. Back to our troop, we start the next chapter, and this isn't honestly much of a chapter. We hold against multiple waves of enemies until a timer runs out. I didn't find this to be very difficult, although we did pick up a great new ally along the way. I was very happy to have another mage, though I didn't know it at the time. These mages were cursed when in my hands. In reality, we were supposed to just defend and hold our position as long as possible, but we probably could have defeated all of these enemies given enough time. After time runs out, however, we swap to a cutscene of our party being wildly overwhelmed and nearly defeated. At the last moment, we're graced with two powerful new party members. Leith and Mordecai charge in and defeat multiple enemies, including the enemy commander. Someone in my livestream chat mentioned that this cutscene could have been different if I were able to defeat this commander before being overwhelmed, but obviously I didn't get to see that. Our new Laguz acquaintances came to escort us to Gallia to see the king, and also just happened to save us. Of course, nothing is so easily done, and we run into an enemy force on the way to see the king. This fight should not have been so eventful. I made some poor choices during this fight, and Boyd unfortunately met his end here. There's a couple of ways I could have saved him. He also would have survived if he hadn't missed this last chance to hit his opponent. Although we lost Boyd in this fight, we did gain a powerful new ally. Marcia, who promised to repay us in a previous chapter when we helped her, shows up somewhat randomly in this fight to help us. While lamenting the loss of our Boyd, we've finished the trek towards Gallia's castle and meet the king himself. We learn a few interesting facts while talking to the king. We hear about some of the backstory of Commander Grill, for instance. He worked in Gallia as a mercenary, and Ike was actually born here and spent part of his childhood in Gallia. There are a few other interesting bits to be gleaned here also. More importantly, however, King Mufasa tells us that they cannot keep and defend the princess due to what is essentially politics. They recommend that the princess head toward Benian and that we escort her. So it happens that we depart for Benian, and by that I mean we leave back towards Crimea to find a port and a boat. But first, Ranulf tells us of a nearby castle that may house Crimean prisoners. We all agree that it's worth the risk to take a look and head that way. This detour seems to be way out of the way, but can potentially be incredibly helpful as there's multiple characters you can recruit throughout this area if you're successful. Also, through some unusual circumstances, we gain a new ally before the battle even begins. This mission can be a goldmine for bolstering your forces. Here we gained 4 new allies in total, which is awesome. This is technically a stealth type mission, which isn't all that common throughout this game, but I failed it immediately due to not understanding how the mechanics worked. Even though this happened and the enemies got the jump on us, this mission was not that difficult. Happy to have the new allies from this mission, we move on until we find a port town. This town strikes the whole party oddly, as it seems to be completely unaffected by the ongoing war, as if they don't even know it's happening. This facade doesn't hold up long, however, as, like always, a wild enemy has appeared. Early on in this battle, there doesn't seem to be anything amiss as we fight. We even pick up Zahark as an ally. Well, it would seem that literally everyone in this town aside from our party only wants to destroy the Lagoos, Zahark only wants to help. He definitely stands out as an odd character due to this, but in a way that I like. As far as I can remember, we never really learned the reason that he does this. I remember feeling pretty shocked that he approached Leith and didn't attack, but offered friendship. What a guy. There are a couple other oddities that come up during this fight. We're given the opportunity to attack an enemy named Jill, though we're told specifically that they won't attack us first. I was really weighing the option to attack this group, but decided not to due to a small little hiccup that decided to rear its ugly head. At the end of my 6th turn, the Black Knight himself appears on the battlefield. It's kind of awesome to watch him just casually stroll through this building here. He's almost taller than the building itself. We rush towards the boat and manage to make it on board as the Black Knight closes in. Ranulf, of course, shows up just in time to slow him down, and then Sephron shows up just in time to save Ranulf from dying. Between the two of them, however, we make our escape on the boat headed towards Benian. Here, we meet the captain of our new transport, Nasir, who promises to deliver us safely to Benian, along with revealing to us that he is also a Laguz. Not only this, but Nasir also manages to catch a young thief on the ship. A stowaway. We're offered an opportunity to aid this boy, or not, and because I'm a big sap, I choose to aid him. This has him permanently join the party, which felt awesome, until I saw that he was only level 1, and weaker than Titania was when she was an infant. It's sometimes a perk to have a thief along for the mission, even if they're kinda weak, however. That being said, I was happy to have anyone that would join our party at this point. The ever-vigilant Nasir also notes to us that we're being chased by pirates. At first, Ike doesn't see them, but then it's pointed out to him that our new friends are in the sky. We briefly try to outrun them, though that is short-lived as our boat gets caught up near a shore, and we're forced to defend ourselves. I made 2 mistakes on this map. One I'd argue was just inexperience, but the other one was just a moment of carelessness. Soren points out that the birds are weak to both bows and wind magic, so I equip my only mage with the only wind magic that I have. I failed to notice that she wasn't high enough level to use the wind magic, and then I also failed to protect her when she really needed it. Reeling from my loss, I cried deeply on the inside, and then I made it a priority to recruit Jill, who had wandered onto the map. I wasn't certain I could get her to join, but I knew for sure that I wanted to try. I sure didn't have to try hard, however. She came straight to me and demanded to help us fight the Laguz. Jill was an interesting character to me. At first I was not a fan of her, but I did really come to like her as a character over time. Cleaning up the rest of this fight wasn't easy, but we did make it through without any further casualties. Ike quickly checks on the party and ship, and then in a rash move immediately decides he's bored and wants to run onto the shore. 3 guys rush from the tree and tell Ike that he is to leave immediately. Ike poorly tries to explain his situation, but these 3 guys are having none of that. At first glance, they didn't seem all that menacing, but they immediately became much more intimidating when they transformed into terrifying lizards. No, not that one. Coming to our rescue, however, is the Goldoan Prince himself, who seems to be much kinder to strangers and orders these dragons to, instead of attacking us, help us. Alincia and Ike have a conversation afterwards that really points directly at some of the underlying meaning of this story. Essentially, they say that anyone can be either good or evil, and it doesn't really matter what they are or where they hail from. After this, a far more important conversation can be had with Amy, where she hits on Ike, and it's sort of hilarious. Jill has a lame excuse for hanging around, but we'll see if she warms up to our group more as time goes on. Nasir approaches us to inform us that we're being accosted by an envoy of Binion. They want to know, is the princess on board with us? I gotta say, my initial reaction was...
How about no?
In the end, however, Alincia does agree to meet with this envoy. We meet Tanith of Binion's Holy Guard, and it turns out that this isn't a sham and that the Apostle of Binion wishes to meet Alincia. But because nothing is so easy, a running theme in this game, it seems that the Apostle was kidnapped, and this envoy leaves immediately to resolve that problem. While we see an opportunity to help, Soren sees an opportunity to gain favor, which is hilarious. It's not out of character for him, however. My live chat informed me that there was an opportunity to gain 2 new allies in this fight. It was pretty obvious that we could gain Astrid as an ally. Unfortunately, I failed this immediately. I didn't stop all the enemies from approaching her, and the one attack that made it to her destroyed her. This stopped me from recruiting both her and having Gotri rejoin the party. Beyond this initial failure, the fight itself isn't actually all that difficult. But somehow, during the chaos of the fight, the Apostle has gone missing. Of course, we just happen to find her aboard our ship, and Ike just happens to treat her like a child. Well, at least he kindly tries to tend to her injuries, I guess. Even though Sanaki, the wild empress of all that is Binion, cannot stand Ike's lack of manners, she does invite us to her court in response for saving her, and we oblige her on that offer. It would seem that Sanaki isn't quite convinced that Alincia is indeed the Princess of Crimea, and that she cannot quite support Alincia as the heir of Crimea without some form of proof. Ike defends the princess, somewhat crudely, and gets threatened with death by one of the Apostle's chefs. It's a great moment, but it's all a ruse. As we had met with Sephirim previously, he sent word to the Empress ahead of time that Ike and company were coming. Sephirim also vouched for Alincia's lineage long before our arrival. It would seem that this game that Sanaki is playing is a bit too much for Ike to hold his tongue, and he loses his temper. There's a bit of back and forth here, but eventually the Apostle takes her leave to address Crimea's situation with her own senators. Still fuming at the situation, Ike receives some much-needed perspective from both Nasir and Titania, who inform him that Sanaki actually just saved both himself and the princess from a very unfortunate situation. Alincia becomes enamored with Ike over his rude outburst on her behalf, as if it were any secret that she was falling for him. Sigrun brings us a task from the Apostle, and after having grown up a lot in recent days, Ike accepts this task without complaints. We're to ambush and stop a band of merchants and retrieve their cargo. We're not told many details, but we get a glimpse of the merchants talking amongst themselves, and their conversation leaves me with no guilt for fighting them. Interestingly, along with this band of ragtag not merchants, we find Marcia's brother up to no good as always. Marcia essentially drags him away by his ear, and it's kind of funny to behold. This fight goes nice and smoothly, even though the enemy releases some feral blues on us. While not a major threat to us, we do immediately learn what type of merchants we're dealing with here. Upon returning with the cargo, I feel like I'm doing a lot of finger quoting here, we're told we cannot investigate the cargo that we've returned. It all feels sort of odd to me, like we're smuggling live contraband. After this, we're briefly treated to a cutscene with all of the Laguz kings meeting to discuss the future of Crimea and Princess Alincia. We also learn that Dayan knew of Alincia's whereabouts, and they're actively trying to eliminate her. This does give us a fair bit of insight on these kings and how they truly feel not only about each other, but also about the current Crimean situation. I like this moment a lot because it introduces us to some new characters, but also gives us perspective on their personalities and demeanor, allowing us to see their character growth, or lack thereof. In another cutscene, we see more foul personality from Nisala as he talks to Rayson. Along with this, we're treated to seeing the grimy, slimy underside of one of the nobles of Binion. We're left only to guess what awful thing Oliver wants from Nisala. Meanwhile, on Earth, we see that the Apostle doesn't seem interested in conversing with our team and merely pays us for our work and then gives us another job, seemingly without much consideration. The party finds this to be a little odd, while also being confused by the upper echelon nobles. I've skipped most of the support cutscenes, but I want to touch on this one with Jill and Leith, since it shows Jill's character growth a lot. Jill is curious about why the Laguz dislike the Bajork, but Leith just turns this around on her entirely. This shows Jill the ignorance of her predisposition that the Laguz hate the Bjork. We don't yet know why Jill despises the Laguz, but I love this little personal growth moment. We're sent out on another mission, this time to dispense of a band of nearby thieves. However, it quickly becomes clear that this isn't just a group of thieves as we're being led to believe. It is instead a band of Laguz rebels that have taken refuge in this area. We're forced to fight them, unfortunately, over a misunderstanding that takes place here. Okay, most of the allies that you can recruit have reasonably obvious circumstances in which they can join you. But this guy? You can only get him by standing on this tile with Leith specifically. What the heck is that randomness? Stefan here has an obvious thing for our cat girl Leith and will join you immediately upon meeting her. However, he's not visible on the map, so you'll only find him if she stands on this tile. I only found out about this because my chat told me directly. There's nearly a 0% chance I'd have found him otherwise. Back to the fight. I was really torn about fighting Maurim. Maurim? Maurim. Maurim. Rarim. He seemed to be an excellent character, and I kept feeling like I was just missing whatever I needed to do to get him on my team. The secret, however, is to just dumpster him and move on. After the fight, the party meet with Tormod and Morarim, and find out that the nobles in Binion have just been capturing Laguz. This obviously troubles our hero Ike, who decides to offer his assistance to this rebel faction. Meanwhile, Nasela and Rayson appear to be patching things up while out on their little duo trip. Nasela convinces Rayson to accompany him, right into a trap. It was pretty obvious to anyone paying attention that this was about to happen, although it wasn't directly spelled out. This wannabe regal sweat stain under Satan's armpit has apparently purchased Rayson from Nasela. The way Oliver acts here just makes my skin crawl. I can't stand it. Moving on, Ike has brought Tormod to meet with Sanaki and Binion. Ike and team have figured out the Apostles' hidden motive behind these recent missions. They discovered the slave trade, and then were sent to deal with an emancipation group that were labeled as thieves. So it would happen that all along, Sanaki hoped that Ike would help expose and end this slavery once and for all, which makes our next task very satisfying to me. We're to investigate Oliver and his evil shenanigans. I quite like this chapter. As we head to meet with Oliver, we're confronted by the guards of his manor. They bring Oliver to meet us once we show the Apostles' seal on our orders. Of course, he's immediately stressed out by this, but does agree to show us through his manor. Giga Alpha Chadtania and Mist slip off to have an unguided look around. Oliver leads us through his manor and definitely shows us every room in his home, or so he says. His facade is quickly broken, however, as Mist comes forward and describes the captured bird Laguz that she saw. With Titania backing her claims, Oliver feels backed into a corner and calls his guards to eliminate us. I love this. Watching the skid mark run along back to his guarded chamber. What a joke this guy is. This battle was quite easy, as I finally learned to recognize when I should be watching my rear flank. I did make a mistake and failed to recruit Devdin, which honestly made me feel pretty sad. However, the rest of the mission was no problem, and we found the captured Rayson. This moment with Rayson is definitely intense, and it's pretty obvious that he has a massive fear of Ike. The game awkwardly cuts away from the scene without finishing it. I remember being so jarred by this that I thought I made a mistake and accidentally skipped the scene. Apparently, however, they did this so the following scene would have a greater impact. We learn in quick succession here that the previous apostle was assassinated, and somehow a rumor was started that pinned this attack on the Serenus Herons. A Benian crowd was whipped into a furious rampage over the loss of their beloved apostle and sought to destroy the Heron clan. They were successful not only in destroying the Serenus, but also the forest they called home by setting it ablaze. It would seem that Sanaki is trying to take responsibility for this horrid piece of Binian's past, as it appears to be common knowledge that the Heron clan was not responsible for the assassination since they possess essentially zero fighting abilities. After this revelation, we're asked to find and rescue Rayson, and also we decide to take down the repulsive Duke. There's another awesome moment for Jill here. Now, this is only one instance of it, but I did want to point out that this game has some pretty decent character development. Jill here is growing to appreciate the Laguz tribes more, and seeing that they aren't just horrible monsters. I love that not only does Path of Radiance show the character growth, but in this case, they point out specific moments that cause the character's change of heart, and I really like that. We make our way into the Serenus Forest to find Rayson, and instead we run into the pathetic, putrid, portly Duke who demands his army to destroy us while he saunters off further into the forest. I didn't know this at the time, but this battle is a really long-winded one. It is one battle, but it is separated out into multiple fight segments. I didn't have any trouble during this first segment of the battle, and there wasn't really much to it. There are small story-related bits as we push forward through the forest, however. After this first segment, we find out that the Hawk tribe is nearby, and also we see Rayson himself as a unit just outside the current field of battle. He's frustrated that humans are in the forest and remarks that he must call upon some forbidden magic to be rid of us. All of this sounds pretty bad for us and pushes us to rush through the second part of this battle. The enemies did seem to be more powerful in the second part of this chapter, and I definitely had to navigate this fight more carefully. Marcia really started to become a beast during this time, and I really started leaning on her a lot for my offense. Now, halfway through this forest, we find a white feather, assuring us that we're at least somewhat near Rayson. Nasir is also somehow in this forest with us, and he calls us over to him. He points out that there is a heron in the trees nearby. Rayson slowly walks out, except that it's not Rayson at all. Our very astute Commander Ike tells us that this heron is in fact a girl. So it would appear there's another surviving heron, and we've found her. That's kind of amazing. Unfortunately, she passes out on us as we try to speak with her. And just as this happens, the pestilent bloat himself shows up. And this is how the third phase of the fight begins. The guy that can only grow soft cucumbers shows up and wants to capture Leanne, but he'll have to pry her out of our cold fingers. Ike literally carries her during this fight, so he wields a constant speed disadvantage for the entire battle. Despite appearing to be in a terrible spot initially, the enemies are spread out in a way that you can easily deal with them in chunks around the battlefield. I started with the threats immediately to my northwest, and the rest I took as they came to me while gently moving toward the primary target in the southern part of the map. There were some reinforcements for the enemy on the northwest corner of the map, but it wasn't difficult to take care of with a little bit of strategy. The two-faced guy that failed to make either of them attractive calls for a retreat, and Ike decides to press on for victory. Meanwhile, Rayson meets up with Captain Tibbers and the rest of the Hawk tribe, who eventually convince Rayson that this forbidden magic is not the way to get back at the Bayork. We catch up to Oliver Twisted, who says that we envy him, although I'm not sure he understands the meaning of that word. He calls for some more of his troops to defend him, and finally, he's a combatant on the field that we can defeat. This fight wasn't all that difficult, but can be made easier if you let the Hawks do some of the heavy lifting. The group of Hawks and Rayson show up partway through this fight and somehow sense the presence of another heron. Fortunately for us, they're able to determine that we're protecting Leanne. This causes them to go against all they know and aid us in this fight. I'm happy they didn't attack us, but sad that they stole so much XP from my group. We essentially raced Tiburn's group to see how much XP we can sweep up from the battlefield through the end of the fight. The next turn of events happen fast and are packed with important story information. Rayson approaches us and asks us who we are and who we're protecting. We relinquish Leanne from our care, and the two reunite in a very lovely moment. Tiburn requests our purpose for defending Leanne and scoffs at the idea that the Apostle of Benian could possibly have employed us to do so. We bring the party to the Apostle so they can discuss the matter in person, and in a shocking twist, Sanaki falls to her knees and begs for forgiveness from Rayson directly. I was kind of surprised by this moment. Then something totally not shocking happens. Originally, Rayson refuses to accept any such apology until Leanne steps to the side of Sanaki and bids her to stand. The two herons share some conversation, and I believe I translated it perfectly in my live stream. See, and if you flip that upside down and invert it, it says get over yourself. With Leanne's apparent soul-healing abilities at full force, Rayson actually forgives Sanaki and absolves her of any lingering guilt. And after that, they invite us to a beautiful ceremony of our destruction! Not really. The two herons share a beautiful song that Ike believes sounds familiar, and the life of the forest is restored. The party takes a few moments to rejoice in their victory as the massive, cavernous rift between the Laguz and the Bayork is finally being bridged. Thanks to this long-standing wound finally being healed, Sanaki is pleased with us and offers Benian's assistance to the fullest extent that she is able. She also demands that Ike takes on a new title, informing him that he will accept a promotion from Princess Alencia. All other troops in this game are able to rank up by achieving their max level or by using a Master Seal once they're level 10 or higher. However, in Ike's case, He only promotes through the story at this point, leaving behind his title of Ranger and becoming a Lord. This promotion begins the arc of Crimea's liberation. There's a small time skip here, and we see the big bads talk about how great they are and how they know exactly what we're doing and we're playing right into their hands and whatever. Typical bad guy behavior here. But then we cut back to Ike and Tanith discussing that Ike and the party have just made it to the edge of Dayan territory. She claims that Wyvern Riders are fierce enemies and that it may be wise to let her and the other flyers handle them. I guess we'll see about that. Just as we go to start this battle, a most unexpected, although very welcome event happens. We're accosted by Team Hawk and the Herons. Rayson requests to join our party, hoping to make up for the courtesy that we showed him previously. We can turn it down, though I don't know why anyone would do that. At the same time, King Tibbers asks Olki and Janoff to stay with us and keep Rayson safe. Another small twist as we start this battle is we find out that the King Crow himself is helping Dayan. And what's this? Shinon? What are you doing here? You're on the wrong side of the battlefield! Fortunately, we can get him back on our team if we play our cards right. Although, as I found out, he isn't very good anymore. He stopped growing, and the game grew around him, so he's a lot less impressive than he was back in the early chapters. If you manage to get Rolf to talk to Shinon, and then have Ike take him down, Ike will remark that Shinon shouldn't move as he'll tear the wound. The quick conversation makes it clear that Shinon is spared. There was a really close call with Nafini here. She got walled off by some reinforcements, and then further walled off by even more reinforcements. Fortunately, Oscar let these guys know that crit happens. Nafini was wearing her dancing shoes, and Giga Alpha Chad Monster Tania was close enough to help peel me out of this rough situation. Also in this fight, I finally learned how character relationships applied to actual stat boosts in combat. I'm honestly somewhat embarrassed that I ignored this mechanic for so long. It's actually really powerful. These stat boots made the rest of the fight basically a joke. After the battle, Ike gets a chance to catch up with our good old friend Nasir. He informs us that our Galleon friends are not content with defense any longer and are now on the offense. Ike laments briefly that he'll never be as great as his father, though he understands that he owes all that he is to Commander Grill. We also get a chance to see Soren and Nasir snip at each other briefly. While this is interesting, we don't really figure out the meaning behind any of this just yet. Apparently they both have hidden motives and secrets that they would rather the other didn't know about. Moving forward, we see Nesala and General Patrine scoff repeatedly at each other. Patrine thinks her army is worthless, and Nesala reveals to us that he'll be fighting us directly in the next battle. I didn't know at the time, but he is truly an intimidating adversary. Here we can get another glimpse into Jill's character growth before the start of the next battle. It appears to be a conversation between Jill and Mist at first, but then an unknown Dayan troop sneaks up to talk to Jill? Captain Har has apparently been tracking Jill and is surprised that she joined up with the Crimean party. It's very endearing for Jill to say that it was circumstantial only at first, but now she's here because she wants to be. Har informs Jill that she may have to face her father in combat soon, and in doing so discovers her new resolve and independence. Mist quickly informs Ike, who doesn't seem particularly worried about the uninvited guest, but more worried about Jill's well-being. Mist also takes a moment to beg Ike not to have Jill fight against her father. This is really sweet, but also a warning to help you not risk losing Jill as an ally. Upon arriving on the next battlefield, we see Nesala himself, and I gotta say, his stats are much higher than anything you'd like to meet out there. Ulki and Janoff are able to talk to him, though they warn you that it may not make any difference. This battlefield makes it more difficult to talk to him because there are ballista that make it a little bit of a pain to maneuver around. They aren't really that difficult to deal with as long as you pay attention to their attack range. Here in this fight, I did want to make contact with King Kilvas and have one of our Hawk friends speak to him. However, it turns out that he attacks if any of your troops get too close to him. I was really hoping to see what this conversation would do, but I decided to clear the battlefield first before doing so after we lost Ulki. Much to my surprise, however, King Crow decides the fight isn't worth it and just leaves if he's the only combatant left. Super Omega God tier Chadtania points out after this battle that we're quite rich as we've managed to find a stockpile of the enemy's gold. Interestingly, Ike requests $50,000 worth of gold for a personal matter. I wonder what that's all about. Fortunately, we don't have to wait long. First, we're gonna skip over Patrine's little panic attack here and skip to this conversation between Ike and Volky. Turns out that the money is to pay Volky for some information he mentioned a long time ago. This is where the game starts getting real with us. Volky was hired to kill Commander Grill in the event that he ever went berserk. Also, if Grill was slain by his pursuers, then Volky was to look out for Ike. We find out that the medallion that Mist carries has an evil god sealed in it, and it would seem that Dayan is actually looking for this very medallion. This medallion has intense power and can drive the one that holds it to madness, bringing out the absolute worst chaos that resides in a person. Volky tells us that Grill once held this medallion and went berserk, slaying several highly trained fighters that came for him, and then he turned on his neighbors, his friends. He even ran through his wife. Ike's mother rushed to Grill to take the medallion away from him to restore his balance and bring him to his senses, and in doing so, she traded her life for his sanity. It would seem that Mist's mother was the only person capable of holding this medallion without losing her sanity, and she passed this trait down onto Mist. Now Ike bears the responsibility of protecting Leyren's medallion. Naturally, immediately after this, Mist finds that her medallion is missing. Who could have seen this coming? And she whines a bit to the very sleep-deprived Ike, who lashes out a bit but says with certainty that he'll find the medallion. As the party journeys ahead, we discover that the road has been flooded and is impassable. Soren asserts that this is definitely Dayan work, intended to slow our progress. But this freight train just can't be stopped. Janov soars to the sky and leads us to the floodgates. If you go through the dialogue options before this battle, you can choose to be accosted by Khalil, whose attractiveness knows no bounds. She claims to be a first-class mage, and she's not wrong. I hoped I wasn't sealing her fate when I had made the choice to hire her and move on to the next fight. Speaking of the next fight, this is the very battle we were warned about previously. Jill's father is the enemy commander here. I didn't choose to leave Jill at camp for this battle, however, I didn't allow her to approach her father. At the time, I didn't know what might happen, so I just avoided this altogether. There weren't really any noticeable issues in this fight, though I personally felt bad fighting Jill's father. It was kind of touching for Ike to approach Jill after the fight and try his best to console her while giving her some space to consider what happened. And now, for a massive plot twist, we find that Ina is to lead the next defense against the Crimean army, but also that she has a guest? She receives from this mysterious guest the stolen medallion and informs him that she must fight the Crimean army directly. Our off-screen presence is obviously directly upset by this information. Ina claims that she is determined to return to his side, even if she has to destroy the entire Crimean army. And then she bids farewell to Nasir. So it happens that my not-so-trusty boat driver is the snitch and thief all along. Cutting back to the Crimean army, the party is rapidly approaching the Dayan capital, and Nasir takes a moment of time to try and persuade Ike not to attack the capital. I wonder why he might do that. We notice that the gates are open as we approach. Surely it can only be a trap, but since there's no way around it, we enter. Gasps in Spanish. Who could have predicted that the gates would slam shut behind us, trapping us inside? This all takes place shortly after we get a behind-the-scenes look and see that Ina is actually a powerful dragon. So their goal was to trap us with a dragon surrounded by troops and put us to our end. Seems logical, I guess. There is a rather beefy gentleman on this map that Ike can speak to if you're able to arrange it. Doing so will cause him to recall the fighting style of his friend. Upon realizing that Ike is the son of his friend, Toriano refuses to fight and accepts defeat. Fortunately, however, Ike is persuasive and convinces him to join us instead of laying down his life. I love that Commander Grill still has an impact on battles we take part in, showing that he's not truly gone. And now, let's take care of the dragon. Honestly, I felt badly for attacking Ina. I didn't want to defeat someone that just wanted to stay near a loved one. We do deplete her health to 0, however we do not strike her down. Ike gives her the chance to surrender, but she takes that chance to make an escape. Nasir naturally shows up on the battlefield, and in doing so we discover his betrayal as he helps Ina escape. Ike demands an explanation, but none is given. As Nasir is taken away, he gives us our next destination, Palmeni Temple. Palmeni Temple brings us a slightly new mechanic, and I say it that way because it's not the first time we've been able to shove enemies, however this is the first time you kind of really need to do so. This temple is a peaceful home to the priests, but unfortunately for them, some bandits have taken refuge here and are using the priests as literal shields. We knew something like this may be happening in this mission since we spoke to this man before the mission and he asked us a cryptic question about a game that he's playing which is totally not related to the mission we're about to undertake. This mission is really not as hard as it seems. Basically, you just need to not let any of your units stand next to one of the priests and push them out of the way when you need to. There is one priest that attacks with range, but he's not really very powerful and is only a minor threat. On this map, we were able to take out all of the enemies while sparing all of the priests. You can defeat the priests here if you want, or feel like you need to get through, though I wouldn't recommend it. The priests gave me an amazing staff after this mission, and I believe they only do this if you're able to spare them all. There have been a lot of loose ends in this story so far, with several events answering one question only to create several more. Here, we finally start to find some real answers this time to help us tie things together. Rayson seems completely lost in thought after this mission, clearly fully absorbed by the writings he's found on the walls. The team speculates about it briefly, but decides to give him some space. After a while, Rayson comes to talk to Ike, Mist, and the Supreme Overlord Titania. He can read the writing on the wall and knows that it belongs to his elder sister. Apparently, he has long believed her slain in the Serenus massacre, but knows now that this is not the case. She was held here at this temple, while her captors demanded that she release a seal on a sacred object they forced on her. However, she refused as it was not within her power to do so. Rayson recounts the story of a young Beork that cared for his sister Lilia during this captivity. Ike and Mist are pretty certain that that young woman was their mother. Ike explains that the treasure was an aged bronze medallion and that they had possession of both the song and the medallion that was entrusted to Elena, Ike's mother. I really love this moment in the game. It really ties a lot of stuff together. It also does it in a way that I just can't get enough of. Lilia slowly grew to trust Elena, and in a similar manner, Ike was able to win over Rayson. Yeah, it's kind of cheesy, but I love writing like this. It really gets you going right in the feels. The next mission is upon us in no time. We are finally crossing back into Crimea. Ike and Alencia are spending a precious moment together discussing this as someone sneaks up on them. Much to my surprise, it's Ranulf. I was very excited to see this happen. I really liked Ranulf as a character. He comes to tell us that King Big Kitty Cat is ready to lend his full support to the Crimean liberation. This is pretty awesome. Gallia's on board, Khalil tells Nafini that she's hot, and Soren plays defense for Ike. Shinon is jealous of Ike. Everything in the world is good at this moment. Well, that is until we find out what's in this next mission. We're going to be facing off against General Petrine herself. Apparently, she set up some traps for us along this final bridge, and we've got to cross it to at long last return to Crimea. As Ike and the party approach this bridge, Ranulf and Ike have a little chat. Ranulf seems suddenly taken aback that he hasn't seen Nasir, and then is even further shocked to find out that he was jailed as an enemy combatant. He discloses that Nasir was actually a Gallian spy and feels as though there must be something wrong. He quickly requests an audience with Nasir, though Ike denies him temporarily to contend with the problem of crossing the bridge. They do agree to speak with Nasir after this fight, however. This battle is honestly one of the more frustrating battles in my opinion. The traps that are placed around the battlefield are invisible pits that your characters can fall into while moving. This stuns them, stopping their movement and ending their turn immediately. They can move out of the pit next turn, and then your units can no longer stand on that tile. So, at the very least, all of the pits are only a one-time annoyance. And this is the only mission they appear in. There are a few other things interesting in this mission. Captain Hard disappears from the battlefield right away. Very typical of him. He does approach from behind later, and you can convince him to join your cause if you have Jill approach and talk to him. He mentions that he was actually scheming against Dan for a while now, and wanted to fight and defeat Petrine also. Sounds good to me. Also, partway through this fight, Lucia and a small force show up wanting to assist and escort Princess Alencia as her retainers. This does sound awesome, but I was very irked at them for trying to steal my XP. Also, Oscar decided to take a nap during this race for the XP, but beyond that, the only real issue to deal with in this fight is General Petrine herself. She is extremely fast, and her weapon strikes with magic damage, making it quite potent. The easiest strategy seemed to be striking her with artillery magic from afar, but I stacked up my units giving Ike all the relationship bonuses I could and had him strike her down. My chat told me there is a special dialogue Soren will have with her if you use him to defeat her, but sadly that was not a possibility for me. Lucia welcomes Alencia home, and it would seem that Alencia is pleasantly surprised, as if she's seeing her sister after having long believed her dead. Also, even though the public of Crimea didn't know about Alencia, the rumors of her deeds have reached the people, giving them hope and courage. The existence of this mysterious Crimean princess has further been confirmed by the Dayan troops that have been searching for her frantically. I think this is a great moment in the story. The princess all along has been trying to fight against Dayan to restore Crimea, and now has more vindication in doing so. It's a simple yet subtle way to show that she will be reasonably well received when she finally makes it home. A side note here that wasn't really shocking to me at all, Ranulf finally gets his moment to discuss Nasir with Ike. and they go to visit Nasir directly only to discover that he's escaped. As there's nothing we can do about that for now, we turn back to the matters at hand. Lucia tells us that other Crimean retainers are waiting to receive Valencia at Castle Delbray. The ladies take a brief moment to poke fun at some of the men, and then we're off. But first, there's another interaction between Jill and Leith. Oh, I was so much more excited for this than I should have been. Leith questions Jill and finds out that she chose to fight against her own father since she felt that it was a more righteous path now. This obviously garnered a lot of respect from Leith, who offers a handshake to show that they respect each other now, and they might even be the friends. Ugh. I know. I've spoken about these two a lot, but when it comes to great character development, I feel these two have the best, especially when it comes to their relationship with each other. Cutting back to the main storyline, we see Bastian and Jeffrey awaiting Alencia's arrival. Jeffrey grows too impatient and goes outside to see if he can spot her in the distance, and to his surprise, he can. But then, not to our surprise, oh, it's actually Dayan troops! Bastian makes his escape to warn Alencia and the others so they can reroute while Jeffrey distracts the enemy troops. Alencia, however, will not stand for this, and demands that they go and fight Dayan to save everyone. Lucia is somehow so delusional that she believes Ike will just whisk Alencia away based on the situation, to which Ike simply replies, no. Yeah! Haha! We like Ike! We like Ike! We like Ike. I started cheering in my seat at this moment. How awesome has Ike become? Lucy's all like, what? And Ike explains the situation simply and cleanly. The Dayan troops are in the way, so we cut through them and go to the castle as planned. Alencia want, Ike deliver. That's how being a mercenary first and a general second works. This battle appears somewhat overwhelming at first, but it's easy to divide the map into sections and handle it in chunks. The ballista can be painful to your flying units if not dealt with accordingly, and it is wise to make it to Jeffrey quickly to save him. Also, early on in the battle, Lucia and Bastian wise up a bit and decide to help in the fight as well. By turn 5, the enemy general started moving towards the castle, so you'll want to make sure that you're getting close by this point. Also, I guess because he got the memo, kind of late in the fight, the Black Knight shows up, because why not? He doesn't do anything, he just waltzes in and says, I wonder how strong they've become. Then he haunts the tree line? In my opinion, this will continue to not make sense later. Having won this battle, the princess and her retainers are all relieved to be reunited. It's a sweet moment, and they all pledge their strength to Alencia while this awesome piece of art shows on screen. Meanwhile, on Earth, Ike runs back out of the castle to get a vibe check on Golbez here. Ike does this excessively necessary back handspring and then lunges at BK to no avail. BK tells Ike that his armor is magical and impenetrable without an equally blessed sword. That sword is Ragnell, the very blade the Black Knight offered to Commander Grill in his final fight. Definitely not Golbez tells Ike to bring it when they next meet, and then he evaporates. Where did he go, you might ask? Well, we don't have to wait long to find out. We finally find out what Leanne's been up to, stowing away at Casa de Tibers here. Tiberin is checking on her when Lotz shows up to deliver a letter. It would seem that Rayson has requested some reinforcements. Tiberin declines when Leanne begs him to go along with him, though he does reassure her that he has a plan. He asks Lotz to help Leanne pack up while he puts his plan into action. Of course, he doesn't tell us what his plan is. That would be too easy. There's a mildly amusing moment with Lotz trying to help Leanne pack while not being able to understand her, but this is all a setup for him to get knocked out while being distracted. Who could have snuck up on him? Well, of course it was the Black Knight. I told you we wouldn't have to wait long to find out where he went. Great thing his massive armor lends itself well to sneaking around silently. This all took place to facilitate getting Leanne to King Ashnard. We find out that BK uses some kind of arcane powder to travel around, but that it drains his strength to do so. And in a shocking twist, we find out that Ashnard is evil and he has evil armor and he wants to release the power of the Dark God because he's evil. Also, we learn that despite him saying that he's not, Tibers is in fact an easy mark. A quick note before the next battle, we're able to speak to a man, and we find out that this man is this gigantic beefcake. Apparently he once pinned a tiger with his bare eyebrows. He'll offer to join your party here if you'll have him. He's reasonably strong and tanky, but I didn't actually end up using him that much. Ike and Ranulf discuss the location of the Galleon reinforcements briefly, which are just beyond a nearby mountain. Just in time, however, Soren shows up to tell us that there is an enemy ambush awaiting us on the mountain. Naturally, since we don't want to lose any time going around, Ike decides that we push directly through. While Ranulf isn't amused, he decides to come along for the ride. This mission did come along with some close calls. I didn't know how these rock traps worked really. At first I thought they just roll straight down the hill towards our team, so I spread out as to not be directly in line with the rocks. This was a massive mistake. The rocks don't just roll straight. I puckered up for sure until this turn ended. I worried they'd drop all the rocks at once. Fortunately they didn't, but I was left worried and wondering how each rock would move. I decided to move Marcia right up the middle of the map to goad the enemy general into attacking her, allowing me to defeat him rather early in the fight. Then I let her destroy this archer on this ballista before retreating a bit back to safety. From that point on, I just climbed the mountain slowly while maintaining my health, though we did have one really close call. I found out that even after watching the rocks closely, I still didn't know how to predict their movement. I thought with certainty I was going to lose Nafini here. 3 rocks came down and had the perfect amount of damage to finish her off. But for some reason that I can't explain, this last rock decided not to hit her. I was definitely having a heart attack at this moment. Peak stress levels confirmed. In the post-fight cutscene, we're nearly crushed again by yet another rock trap, when Daddy Hawk shows up himself and clears the trap for us. He's here responding to Raisin's request for assistance, although it would appear that's not the only reason he's come. We also meet with Mufasa himself, and we all join together to have a war council of sorts. During this, Ike finally reveals to everyone the story of his father, mother, and how they came to protect the Medallion of the Dark God. In this council, it's revealed that the King of Goldoa was actually a hero that fought against the Dark God 800 years ago, and he reminded all the other kings that they must not commit to a war that engulfs the entire continent. Soren, in all of his infinite wisdom, surmises that this is a hint that the medallion's power could be invoked by this strife regardless of where it was and who possessed it. This leaves the council feeling pretty assured that King Ashnard wishes to release the Dark God, much to the shock of nobody. Daddy Hawk here takes a moment to let Raisin know that Leanne was kidnapped, and it was most likely Dayan. Raisin laments heavily at this news. He knows that Leanne cannot release the Dark God from Leyren's medallion, but he doesn't believe that Ashnard knows this. This unfortunate news unsettles the entire group as the screen fades to black. We return later to find Ashnard talking to Burger King himself. It is here that King Ashnard reveals to us a vital secret. And that secret is that King Ashnard giggles like a schoolgirl. As well, it seems that Dayan has captured Ina, and Ashnard doesn't really care what happens to her. He doesn't want her back, as her presence seems to cause Rajayan to grow restless. This is a subtle hint, and I love it, by the way. Back to Team Crimea, Soren explains that there are 2 forts up ahead, and suggests that we distract one of them and take down the other. King Daddy Hawk, known for his invention of shirtless technology, decides that he will take point distracting the smaller group at the castle. As we leave for the fort, Alincia approaches us. What's this? She's wearing battle armor? And she has a Pegasus that belonged to her great-grandmother? It would seem that everyone is against her wishes to join the frontline fighting, though they do vouch for her credentials as a trained fighter. Ike is pretty neutral about her joining, stating that, well, she's the boss and it's her decision. At this fort we come to, Ike says we're going to cut them down. He doesn't know, however, that the enemy General Bertram is a snake! I never really figured out what this guy's deal was. He seems almost happy to be defeated. Speaking of defeat, this fight was really not difficult at all for the crew I had amassed up to this point. Ike could easily cut down any enemy, and several of my other units were more than capable of holding their own. I even got some XP for Alincia in this fight. I felt like she could have become a monster if I had trained her up, but I didn't want to do so with it being so late in the game. Maybe if I had saved up some bonus XP to dump on her, she could have been more useful, but I decided just to not use her. Since we've cleaned up well at the fort, we headed over to assist Alpha Hawk at the castle he was distracting. Tiburon tells us that the enemies weren't anything special with the exception of one unit, a powerful foe clad in black armor. Ike knows now that the Black Knight must be in that castle. Ike explains briefly that the Black Knight wears magic armor that cannot be damaged with ordinary attacks. However, it appears that Ike had Ragnell ever since the night that his father died, and now it's finally time to put this supposed magical sword to the test. Entering the castle, I felt like the guard was a little lacking, with their defense feeling a little anemic to me as I pushed in really hard. Maybe a bit too hard. I overextended Marcia a bit too much and definitely risked losing her. Fortunately, my recent brain aneurysm didn't cause us to lose her based on Marcia skillfully dodging this last enemy attack with retreat as an option afterwards. I definitely went forward with a bit more care after this. After I convinced Hafed that his armor was woefully inadequate, we moved on through to the BK drive-thru. I was very nervous going against the Black Knight. Thinking back to his stat page, I wondered if we could even truly defeat him. Even though I felt the stakes were already high enough, Fire Emblem disagreed with me. Ike rushes in just in time to see BK cut down Ina. However, he admits to us that the blow wasn't quite fatal. Our benevolent opponent tells us that we can save Ina if we're able to do so by force. And then of course, just before we engage, Mist also shows up to help. This really threw me. I was prepared to have Ike fight the Black Knight, but now I only thought of protecting Mist. The thought of throwing away this Ironman run after having come so far tilted me, and I decided to engage very slowly. Just as I decided to strike, enemy reinforcements appeared to try and strike down Mist. This threw me entirely off balance again, and so I tried to take them down first so I could focus on the Black Knight alone. Little did I know, however, that this was a fool's errand. At the end of turn 5, Nasir shows up and reveals that his true form is a dragon. Then he unleashes a desperate attack to try to take down the Black Knight. This attack brings down the castle walls around both Nasir and BK, leaving them both presumably lost. My chat informed me after that if we had engaged and defeated the Black Knight, we could have gotten the very powerful Nasir as a party member. Sadly, I tripped over my own shoelaces and did not get to that finish line. As Ina recovers, she reveals to us the location of Leanne, which provokes our entire party to set out immediately to rescue her. Coming quickly towards Tower Gritnia, Ranulf stops us briefly to tell us that he smells something rotten in the tower. And he meant literally. Ina tells us that they are essentially experimenting on Lagoos in this tower, contorting them with odd potions. She also mentions that the cocktail of this tower includes all types of Lagoos, even other dragons. Partway through this battle, we see that Nesala had disguised himself as a Daean soldier in order to help Leanne escape. He takes her and they flee together when they notice that we have got the enemy's attention. In reality, I felt like this whole battle was designed to just give us an opportunity to gain a bit of XP before moving on to the final battle. It seems like Nesala could have done his part here without the party being involved. It might have just been a cutscene, honestly. At first, this fight did seem a little bit intimidating with these dragons on the battlefield, but if you take them on carefully one at a time, it's pretty easy for Ike to carve himself out a pair of dragon skin boots. The enemy boss here does have some mildly threatening magic attacks, but with some caution, he's easily taken care of with his low defense. Having promoted the enemy general to Battlefield Corpse, we find out that Nesala actually only rescued Leanne to pay off his debt to the Hawk King. Having done so, Daddy Hawk absolves King Crow of his debt, and we move on towards the final battle. On the heels of a rather rousing speech from our fair princess, Ike follows up with what feels like will be a fumble, though I do feel like he recovered well as he went along. Then we're greeted with this awesome scenery. As we crash upon the walls of the castle, we see Bryce call out for Ashnard's retweet? Yeah, good. We also see further evidence that the King of Daein is a real piece of work. For some reason, Bryce still stays to defend him despite all of this. To start this last mission off, the world's tallest midget himself approaches us to taunt us briefly before retreating to the rear of the battlefield behind his personally handpicked elite soldiers. In reality, this fight was not so easy, though I was determined to finish this battle without losing any of our party members. As long as you don't let yourself get overwhelmed, the enemy dragons are really the only threatening opponents aside from Ashnard himself. And if you have a decent mage, they aren't so bad to take out, given they only have a one-tile attack range. Also, you can gain a really strong ally during this battle in particular, if you want to call them. I'm not sure if there were others, but I was able to call either Tibern, Nesala, or Gifka. Knowing a thing or two about Daddy Tibbers, I gave him a ring and he joined the fight. While this fight is no joke and you can definitely get overwhelmed, if you don't overextend, it isn't too bad. My chat did tell me that if you're playing hard mode, that Ashnard moves around the battlefield seeking you out. That honestly sounds a bit terrifying. He's very powerful and has quite a lot of movement. There were several of my units that likely couldn't even survive a single encounter with him. Fortunately for me, however, he doesn't move on normal difficulty. We stack up our relationship bonuses and strike him down with Ike while healing from afar with Mist. With this final blow, we've finally ended our journey. Again, after having won, my chat told me that in hard mode this wasn't quite the end of the battle, but obviously we did not get to see that here. In a somewhat shocking twist that I genuinely didn't see coming, the following cutscene shows Ina quickly approach the fallen king. Despite Ike warning her that the king's mount was still alive, she ran right up to it and greeted it with this very touching piece of artwork. There were clues along the way that you could have picked up on, But this mount is actually Ina's beloved. Rajayan was once a member of the dragon tribe, as Ina is, but was transformed due to the king's dark rituals. Fortunately for Ina, Leanne and Rayson step up in the moment and sing together a song of healing, bringing Rajayan back to his normal form. I remember thinking it was so crazy to me that Ina could have loved the king despite how awful he was, but now it all started to make sense. After this touching moment, Mist sorts through the battlefield and finds her medallion. Though happy to have it back, she gifts it back to the Serenus where it truly belongs. And with that, our journey is truly coming to a close. Or at least that's what I would say. But of course, this is only half of the story. This game has a direct sequel called Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. I can't wait to see what that game has to offer. If you hang around for it, there's also an epilogue here, which is great. I love to hear more about the characters because I did grow attached to several of them. This game also does something else that I really love. It shows us some statistics about our journey, including the records of our units. At first, it shows me that my IQ is much lower than I'd like to admit, but then we get to see the bosses of our team. My all-stars were Leith, Nafini, Marcia, Ike, and in the lead, of course, is Super Omega Alpha Overlord Giga Chadtania. Who could have seen that coming? Much like Simba running away with his tail between his legs, only to come back much stronger than he ever could have imagined, this game successfully portrays Ike as a character that has grown through his losses. At first, he struggled greatly with the loss of his father, but later realizes that his father is not truly gone and lives on through him. Throughout Fire Emblem, there are several ways that the game subtly points this out to you, and I love that. Path of Radiance was honestly way better than I thought it was going to be. For some, I could see the tile-based movement and menu-driven interface being a negative. I'd argue that if you feel that way, then this type of strategy game just isn't for you. In my opinion, the game constantly builds on itself, slowly adding new mechanics throughout the entire game so that the battles don't become stale or feel like repeats. Each battle brought enough threat that I felt pressured but never totally overwhelmed. Even when some enemies seemed insurmountable, I was able to find a way to deal with those threats, usually by taking on the battlefield in chunks at a time. As the story went on, the difficulty ramped up, there's no doubt about that. However, since my skill and understanding of Fire Emblem also improved, I feel like the game actually got a little easier over time. According to my stream chat, I would have struggled a lot more in the end on the harder difficulty, and I'm looking forward to experiencing that struggle sometime. If I had to put a number on it, I'd give this game an 8.5 out of 10. If you enjoy strategy games, then this one is an easy call. Play it and have a great time. Thanks team so much for watching, and until next time, take care.